You woke up this morning because a small glowing rectangle told you to. You checked it before you even sat up. It said 7:04, and somewhere in your mind, a whole machine started turning. The meeting at 9, the train at 8:40, the coffee that has to happen before both. Your entire day is already sliced into numbered pieces, and you agreed to none of it. You just inherited it. But here is a question you have probably never asked yourself. For almost the entire history of our species, none of that existed. No 7:04, no minutes, no little rectangle. So how did people know when to wake, when to meet, when to plant, when to run? How did humans live without clocks? Start with the obvious answer, because the obvious answer is the sky. For most of human history, the sun was the clock, not a metaphor for a clock. The clock. It rose, it climbed, it fell, and that was the entire day laid out in front of you. No numbers required. Morning was when the light came. Noon was when your shadow was shortest and pointed straight down. Evening was when the shadow stretched long and thin across the ground. You did not read the time. You looked at it. And people got frighteningly good at this. There are farmers and herders documented well into the 20th century who could tell you the hour, roughly, just by glancing at the length of their own shadow against their feet. Some medieval texts literally gave the time as when your shadow is 6 feet long. That was a real, usable unit. Your body was the sundial. You carried it everywhere. But the sun has a problem, and you already know what it is. It goes away. Half of every day, it simply is not there. So what did people do at night? They looked up. The night sky, before electric light drowned it, was not a scattering of faint dots. It was a blazing, crowded, moving ceiling, and it turned like clockwork, because it essentially is one. The stars wheel around the pole once a night, every night, in a slow, reliable circle. Sailors, travelers, and night watchmen learned to read that rotation like a dial. The rising of a particular star meant a particular hour. In fact, the very word hour comes to us through Latin and Greek from a root tied to season and time of day. And the Egyptians were already dividing the night into stretches marked by which stars were climbing over the horizon. They called them decans, 36 star groups, taking turns to announce the passage of the dark. Here is where it gets interesting, because knowing roughly what time it is at night is one thing. Coordinating a whole society around time is something much bigger. And for that, humans did not start with the sun or the stars at all. They started with sound. Think about a medieval town. Most people could not read. Almost nobody owned any kind of timepiece. And yet somehow, everyone showed up for the same market, the same prayers, the same curfew. How? Bells. The church bell was the single most important time technology in Europe for centuries. It rang for dawn prayers, for midday, for evening, for danger, for death, for celebration. You did not need to know it was, say, 6 in the evening. You needed to know the bell had rung for vespers, and that meant a specific thing, and everyone within earshot heard it at exactly the same instant. Time was not something you read privately. It was something the town shouted at you, together. And that word, curfew, hides a small piece of history most people walk past. It comes from the old French couvre-feu, cover the fire. When the bell rang at night, you were meant to bank or cover your hearth to prevent the whole timber town from burning down while everyone slept. A rule about fire safety became a word about time. Language remembers things we forget, but bells and shadows still leave a gap. What about when there is no sun, no stars, and no bell? What about measuring a short, exact stretch of time, on demand, in the dark, indoors? For that, humans got clever with the two things that flow at a steady rate: water and fire. The water clock is genuinely ancient. The Egyptians had them, the Greeks improved them, and they worked on a beautifully simple idea. Water drips out of a container at a roughly constant rate, and the falling level marks the passing time, like sand in an hourglass, but wetter and older. The Greeks even used water clocks in their courts to keep lawyers from talking forever. Your time to speak was literally a bowl of draining water. When the water ran out, you sat down. One imagines that improved brevity considerably. Fire told time too. In China, people burned incense sticks calibrated to smolder for a known duration, sometimes with threads and small weights set into them, so that as the fire reached each thread, a weight would drop into a metal tray with a chime. A clock you could smell. King Alfred the Great in 9th century England is said to have used marked candles that burned down at a steady pace to divide his day between governing, praying, and rest. When the flame reached a line, one part of the day was over. Now, here is a fact that reorganizes the whole story. For thousands of years, an hour was not a fixed length. Read that again. The hour, the thing you treat as an unchanging unit, used to stretch and shrink. Many societies, including the Romans, divided daylight into 12 hours and the night into 12, no matter the season. But daylight in summer is much longer than daylight in winter, which means a summer daytime hour was long and a winter daytime hour was short, and they were both called an hour. Time itself breathed with the seasons. You did not live by a constant tick. You lived by a proportion of the light you were given that day. What killed that flexible, breathing hour? The machine. Around the late 13th and 14th centuries, mechanical clocks began appearing in European towers, driven by weights and a clever escapement that let a gear slip forward one measured step at a time. Tick. And these machines did something the sun never did. They cut every hour to exactly the same length, all year round. The historian Jacques Le Goff drew a sharp line here, describing a shift from what he called church time to merchant time. The bell that once called you to prayer was slowly replaced by the bell that called you to work. Because if you are paying people by the hour, you suddenly need every hour to be equal. Precise time and paid labor were born together. That is not a coincidence. And once the machine started ticking, it did not stop, and it did not stay in the tower. Clocks got smaller. They moved from towers to walls, from walls to shelves, from shelves into pockets. By the 18th and 19th centuries, a gentleman with a pocket watch carried the town bell in his waistcoat. Then came the railways, and the railways demanded something almost unthinkable to earlier humans, that a town 200 miles away agree on the exact same minute as yours. Before trains, every town kept its own local time, set by its own noon sun, and nobody minded that the next valley was 8 minutes off. Trains minded. A schedule cannot survive 8-minute disagreements. So in Britain in the 1840s, the railways began enforcing a single standardized time, and by 1884, the world carved itself into the time zones you still live inside today. Noon stopped meaning when the sun is highest here, and started meaning when the network says so. Which brings us back, finally, to that glowing rectangle on your nightstand. Your phone does not read the sun. It does not listen for a bell or watch a candle burn. It pulls the time down from atomic clocks, machines so precise they measure the vibration of a cesium atom billions of times a second and lose less than a second over millions of years. The most accurate timekeeping in the history of the universe, sitting in your pocket, mostly used to tell you that you are 4 minutes late. But something got lost on the way from the shadow to the atom. When your grandfather of 1,000 generations judged time by his own shadow, time was personal. It belonged to his body, his sky, his season. It stretched in summer and shrank in winter, the same way his life did. Now the time is perfect, universal, and completely outside you. It never bends to your day bends to it. We did not just invent a better clock. We handed our sense of time to a machine and agreed to obey it, down to the minute, forever. So the next time that little rectangle wakes you at 7:04, remember that the number is very new, and you are very old. For almost all of human history, no one could have told you what 7:04 was. They only knew that the light had returned, the shadow was still long, and the day, whatever it would hold, was quietly beginning again. If you don't want to miss the next forgotten story we dig up, subscribe now so it lands in your feed the moment it goes live.